Welcome back to Jewish Wisdom on JTV. I'm delighted to again be joined by Rabbi Daniel Rowe. Thanks so much for coming back here again.
Pleasure.
Let's jump into some interesting philosophical issues. Suffering, nice light way to start, and theodicy.
Just going to have a drink while I'm at it. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Judaism firmly believes, as do a lot of the major Abrahamic faiths, that ultimately everything is part of the divine orchestration, everything is ultimately for the good. I think Rabbi Sacks argues in some of his works that something about this whole kind of, don't worry, it's all for the best mentality, is that you end up making peace with suffering. It's one thing to do that in your own life and to say, oh, this is all for the best, but to say to someone else, this is all for the best, sometimes it can come across as a bit insensitive. What do you make of that? Do you think it is making peace with suffering? And the question is, I think one of the questions is, well, is it true or not that everything is for the best? And if it is then true, is it the right thing? Is it the right approach to have in one's own life and when trying to comfort or guide other people?
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in that. I would say there's a few issues here. In principle, does all for the best mean that we're at peace with suffering? I think it depends how you understand all for the best. And obviously Rabbi Sacks is looking at one possible meaning of all for the best, which is a common one, which is don't worry, not our problem, God's problem. I don't think that's what the equivalent concept in Torah of Gamzula Tova, of this is all also for the good, I don't think has that connotation to it. I think when we use those words, we mean something else. It's a bit like pain. Human pain is for the good in most cases. You touch something hot, you get pain. There's an illness going inside, you get pain. Pain is not good, but pain is for the good. It tells you that something is wrong and something needs to be done about it. The sense that God has some kind of plan in history and God is co-author. See, the idea that God has the plan and we have nothing to do with it and we're just passive observers who should do a few nice little things, that's not a very Jewish idea. The idea that God and us are co-authoring history, that's quite a profoundly Jewish idea. Can humans mess up? Absolutely. We already have. The Garden of Eden was a mess up, right?
Oops.
So we're in this mess and there's a lot of problems in the world. And therefore, things may be driving things eventually back to the good. There may be some kind of sense in which things will make sense at the end. That doesn't mean we're supposed to accept anything going wrong right now. On the contrary, we're meant to make a blessing. There's things that happen that are good. We make a blessing, Baruch HaTov HaMeitiv, blesses God is good and does good, right? That means that we see the good. Then there's areas where you say, no, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blesses the true judge. I don't see the good. And I'm not even meant to accept it. The Nachmanides, the Ramban says, when somebody dies, it's meant to hurt. Meaning it's not okay to say, oh, it's all for the good. We're meant to feel the world shouldn't be this way. When there's suffering, when there's war, when there's poverty, when there's pain, the world should not be this way. We humans are here to help bring this world to a much better place where all this bad stuff doesn't happen anymore. So maybe in some big master plan, somehow humanity needs this, or the Jewish people need this, or something. Fine, sometimes you need painful operations, but you shouldn't be in a situation where that's what you need. We shouldn't be in a situation where this is what's going on. And therefore, to say it's all for the good, and therefore I trust somehow God's meta plan in history, meaning his meta redirection of history every time the world messes up, is not the same as saying I'm at peace with it. We can't stand evil, we're here to fight it. We can't stand darkness, we're here to bring good and light.
What about the concept of, I think the Talmud says that someone should accept suffering with love.
Well, first the Talmud says you're supposed to look into your own actions to see if there's something you can do. And by the way, that should not just be, that doesn't mean that's not victim blaming. And we're supposed to do it when we ourselves are in pain. But you see someone else in pain, you still should ask yourself the same question. Could I be doing something in the world that would make them in less pain? That could be a physical interaction, an emotional interaction. It might even be a spiritual interaction, something in my relationship with God. And then the Talmud says if you can't find anything that you could possibly do to improve, then you just have to accept this must be somehow God redirecting history, But understand this, that so long as there's evil in the world, evil will unleash itself against good quite often. It will, so long as there's death in the world, there will be pain to death. So long as all this kind of stuff's going to happen. So yes, God may be re-navigating and pushing things around, and at times that'll be painful, but our job is to bring the world to perfection. And yes, we're supposed to feel when something hurts, we're supposed to say, wow, that's really not the way things should be. We're not meant to be at peace with it.
Okay, but is there
I'll give
place
you an example.
Okay.
Sometimes you have to fight wars. Nazi Germany's taking over Europe, Britain, America, Russia. You have to go to war against them. That doesn't mean you accept the wars the way things should be, right? So you understand that bombing, killing has times when you've got to do it, but that's pretty awful.
In other words, it's for the best, but it's still awful.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So, two follow-up questions then. Is it possible that at the end of history we'll be able to look back and make peace with all the suffering in retrospect? Because, we'll be able to somehow reconcile all of it.
We'll be able to understand, in Jewish thinking, we'll be able to understand God's vision. Mm-hmm. I guess the gap between what it would be like to look at the end of history and the gap between us now is probably a bit like the gap between the way an ant sees the world and the way we do. We see a minuscule fraction. The sense of the world to come, where you have this massive oneness of humanity in deep relationship with God, is that the gap between that and what we are now is so vast that, of course, we look at all of history differently. Right now we don't even really see, even if we believe in a life after death, we don't see it, we don't see the big plans of history. So of course things can look very, very different. Yes, that's true. But that's completely unrelated to the question of, at the same time, when we see things that are hurtful in this world and painful, should we be doing something about them? There are two separate questions. The fact that God may be doing something for the good and is doing something for the good doesn't also mean that we aren't also there to do things for the good. On the contrary, part of what we're always taught is in the end, it's the relationship between man and God that will generate that ultimate redemptive moment when we will re-understand all of history. Mm-hmm. But so long as we're not getting there, a lot of things are going to have to potentially nudge us there, or we're going to have to live with the existence of evil and all the terrible consequences of that until such time as humanity, as we bring God's presence in.
And when one's going through their own challenges and suffering, do you think it's valuable to reinforce the message on a personal level, internal level, to reinforce the message of I'm being directed towards a good here?
I think it's very important that we never try to play God, right, and try to pretend that we can see the big picture.
No, but to say there is a big picture.
To say there is a big picture can be very helpful. It can actually be comforting and reassuring on some level.
To oneself, but also to others as well?
Well, it depends. You see, I think one has to be very careful about the work of comforting others depends on where they are. Whatever worldview you have, it doesn't mean they necessarily have it. You can't just walk into a house of mourning and say, it's all okay, it's all for the good. No, right now somebody's in pain. The comforting thing might just be to listen. There might be no words you can even say that will bring comfort. Certainly philosophical ideas won't bring comfort. And I think that's very important in general. Often when people approach topics like why do bad things happen, sometimes there are people going through pain and they're waiting as if some kind of philosophical picture will somehow remove the pain. It won't. It won't. And therefore, comforting a person is not about philosophical ideas. It rarely is. It can be sometimes that for a person, especially one who genuinely has that belief system where they see a God's hand driving things, it might have some degree of comfort, but it's not going to do it by itself. Yeah. And painful process like loss will take time to work through and will never fully be healed in the sense of it's like losing an organ, a finger, it's like you'd eventually learn to move on without it, but it'll never be like it's really there. So yeah, philosophical ideas are not where comfort comes from. Now, if a person is following Jewish thinking all the way through, will they sense there is some big picture? Yes. Will it still hurt? Of course it will. Will they also be introspective? To some degree. You've got to be careful not to blame yourself. The sense is more, if I see things going on in the world, how am I to respond to it? How can I become a greater person? How can I commit myself to try to remove those things from the world? When it comes to natural things like death, there's nothing we can directly do. Indirectly, we can bring around the day when it will all be gone. But there's nothing we can directly do. And therefore, the gap between seeing, how do I respond to seeing darkness in the world? What light can I bring? It must never turn into blaming. There's a very subtle but critical difference between them.
Why would it?
Because it's my fault. You see, because I could have done something. In a sense, so that's where we have to separate these ideas out. Our response must always be, if I see darkness, what light can I bring? If I see someone else in pain, can I help them? That's the first thing. If I can't help them, how can I make the world better so that won't happen? If I can't do that directly, how can I generate a more godliness in the world so eventually the day will come when all this will be different.
I never understood why, for example, in Genesis it talks about Jacob being frightened that he was going to be hunted down by his brother and killed. Right? I never understood how that works if you have these people of enormous faith and trust in God, that ultimately they're being guided by him. Why be frightened at all of anything?
It's a fair question. On some level, I think it answers on many levels. There might be the very natural level. Human fear is still not a bad thing. It's no matter how much you trust God, it's good to be afraid of sticking your hand in a fire. It's also very good to be afraid for other people. You know, no matter how much you trust God, you can't say, oh, it's okay, I let a child run in the road because it's all God's plan. No, you have responsibility in the world too. And Jacob has many responsibilities. He's got responsibility to a family, not just himself. But he also has responsibility to history. He knows there's been a promise. He knows there's been a blessing. He knows that he has the potential to bring history to perfection. He's been told that by his father. At the same time, he knows that it's not a resolved issue where history's going to go. It's not fully, there's still a brother competing over it. And therefore, I think there's, no matter what fear he may have personally, there's probably also a very, very deep fear about his mission and purpose in this world and what will happen to history if he messes up. And that's a very interesting tension. Having faith in God and trusting that God will get everything to the end doesn't mean that I don't have responsibility to do my best to get it there. And also, if I can sense that if I do mess up, it could take a much longer, more arduous and painful path to get there. So it's right to have fear, but it's a different type of fear. When fear comes because I need to be in control and the world has to run my way, and if it doesn't, it might fall apart, that's quite a self-destructive fear and usually brings about trying to control people and becomes quite destructive to others around us too. Where it's kind of I have faith that God's running the show, but at the same time I have a responsibility and I have to look out for what consequence of actions can be to make sure I deliver my part as best as possible. That's a much healthier place. I don't even know if we'd call it fear in the exact English translation, but something akin to it.
To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click See First. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.